Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another tuning video. Today, the one, the only Godzilla. 600, 650, 700 performance points. You know the drill. Let's get started. Hello everyone, Imposter here. Welcome back to another tuning video, my favorite. Today we're focusing on the R34 Skyline GTR, which is honestly quintessential for everyone's garage, I think, in Gran Turismo 7. And it's a very capable car, but in stock form, there's always a but. I don't know if you've noticed the trend here, but I pick cars that have a but. And I also tend to pick cars that are relatively affordable. This one is not. This one's $500,000 almost, but you win it. And I think it's menu book 23, something like that. So you might just have to work for it a little bit, or you can buy it, either way, but you must have it in your garage. It is a great car and extremely capable for so many different facets of racing. And I can't speak highly enough for it when it is tuned properly. Keywords, tuned properly. So that's what we're gonna be looking at today. This car's stock is about 520 performance points, I think, something like that. My stock car that I'm using actually has closer to 550 because I forgot that you can only install certain mods and you have to leave them on. I forgot that you can't remove weight reduction and high lift cams, I think is the other one I did. So my stock car that I'm using as the baseline has a few more performance points than the actual stock car would, but either way, kept everything else the same. So I did try very hard to get a 550 tune nailed down on that car, and it was tougher. So I decided to skip over it and go for 600, 650, 700, which I think are going to be the much more used levels anyway. That's what we're going to jump into. Let's get started looking at these tunes, see what we can do with this bad boy. Alrighty, here we're taking a look at the stock tune on the GTR. Honestly, not a bad tune for what it is to start out with, but the car is squirrely. For being a GTR, I guess it kind of surprised me. I just kind of thought there'd be a little bit more balance to it. You can see me diving into some of these corners right here. Under heavy braking, the nose of this car just flies to the ground, and you lose a lot of steering capability there. And in turn, when you let off the brake, even if you let off the brake a little bit slowly, the back end whips around because your weight transfer is all off, and you can see it whipping around there as well. So it is kind of nice having a little bit of play in the back axle, but it has too much. So that's something that I worked on to tune out pretty quickly. And even there, you can kind of look at my steering wheel and see all the little micro adjustments I'm doing to compensate for that, because the force feedback makes the back end of this car feel really light. And through tight turns like this, you can see it dove there a little bit, so I had to make a sharper entry into the turn. It kind of caused me to miss the apex, but yeah, overall, it just doesn't inspire very much confidence the way the back wheels react to the front wheels. So, which was kind of surprising to me, since this is, I know it's a road car, but being Spec V, Nürburgring, Mark II, Type 2, whatever, you'd think it would be a little better. I guess that's what my expectation was. And so yeah, sliding through there as well, it's just really slippery. And that's not a characteristic I thought I'd find in a GTR. Despite it being, this one I think is 20 years old at this point. I just thought it'd be a little bit better balanced for what it is. I don't know really anything about how these things handle in real life, but I was less than impressed. Color me less than impressed with the stock tune. Alright guys, so taking a look at 600 here. These tunes revolve largely around handling. I know this thing can be a monster with power and everything, but being a GTR, kind of the platform it's on with the killer all-wheel drive system, I deemed it better to go the handling route. Very first thing to get to 600 was Sport Soft tires, give it a little more grip. I went straight for fully customizable suspension on this one, and then as well the fully customizable diff. Being all-wheel drive, it is, I guess it's easily conflicted based on all the moving parts to it. So starting with suspension, lowered the ride height overall. The anti-roll bar is a little stiffer in the front, a little lighter in the rear. I wanted to kind of induce understeer before anything else. Soften up dampers and expansion just a little bit, or compression expansion, excuse me, just a little bit. I think that's allowable on sports tires, whereas on racing tires you need to stiffen it up. And then same with springs, a little bit softer. Camber, I fooled around with a little bit, 1.5 and 1.1. That can be modified a bit, but it just allows the front wheels to get a little more grip in the middle of a turn. Back wheels don't need too much, being all-wheel drive with the torque distribution. You don't need to compensate so much with camber, so that helps. Differential, I didn't mess with acceleration sensitivity too much on the front, just because I think this helps to kind of pull it out of corners versus push with the rear differential. So turn this one down just to minimize oversteer as well. But I think this allows us to kind of pull through corners a little easier. Front and rear torque distribution, not sure why that's there. I usually run 50-50 or 45-55. I think that's the best case for this car. I don't really think there's any need to send a lot of the torque to the rear axle. You don't need this for 600 if you don't want to. It's on there on this tune. Just a little bit lower on power, but that's after we do racing intercooler, racing air filter, and exhaust manifold, and then race brakes. Race brakes really help with grippier tires as well to get in and out of turns faster. So 350 horsepower on this tune, still plenty quick, and it feels much more controllable through the turns. Downforce is 61 only just to kind of meet the performance point requirements. Keep it just a tick under 600. So let's see how she do. Alrighty, so here we are testing 600, and as I mentioned, you know, these tunes are primarily grippy tunes. We didn't add too much power, being around 380 obviously. We can't go too crazy while adding a lot more grip at the same time if we're restricted to 600. So, but even with sport soft tires, which this one has, it is still very controllable and pointable. As you can see with the fully adjustable suspension under braking there, not too much dive. Overall, as default, fully adjustable is a little bit stiffer and a little bit lower, so you don't have to do too much to compensate for that when you switch to those. But it made it much easier to get through those kind of high-speed S-curves right there without having to worry about the rear of the car stepping out. And then as well, under heavy braking again there, you see that the front wheels don't scrub too much, which was very much a characteristic in the stock car. I suppose this tune could use a little more aero, but I don't think you're going to be going fast enough to justify it a lot of the times. I felt it over that hill there, but not every track has a hill where you're going to need that anyway, so that's up to you. But another thing that came in key right through here, allowing me to keep my foot all the way down, was loosening up that rear differential. I still like it to have a little bit of lock to it, if really needed, but overall, it just made it so much easier to manage power out of turns, which I thought would be actually pretty easy on the stock tune, but it was not. So this really helps with that. And I cut that corner purposely pretty sharp to show you that it is still a little bit softer. I didn't go too crazy with spring stiffness and such, being on the soft tires, or the sports tires still. So that's a little bit more flexible here. This tune could work really well on bumpier tracks with more elevation changes, things like that. Once you get to racing tires, you do have to kick up the stiffness a little bit, so I think I found a balance. Alrighty guys, next up is 650. Most obvious thing we changed here is tires. As I mentioned, with going to racing tires, we got to stiffen it back up a little bit. I found that it's really hard to control. Racing tires are pretty unforgiving when it comes to skidding in any form with understeer and oversteer, so stiffening it back up a little bit helps to eliminate that, along with you know, adjusted differentials and stuff. So a little bit lower on the body height adjustment, just to keep it from, I guess, just less body roll overall. Same anti-roll bar settings. You can play around with the rear one a little bit if that one needs stiffening up. I didn't stiffen it up until the next tune, which you'll see when we had a good chunk more power and more speed. Puts the compression expansion, I think this is technically stock settings, 35 and 45, and then slightly stiffer on the springs as well. Took a little bit of camber out of the rear axle, and then turned down the acceleration sensitivity just because we have more power now. I didn't want it to be too much to handle. And then as well, I'm not sure why this defaults to 595, but this should be 50/50 for all the tunes here. Slight bit more downforce. Again, that's the one I use to get it below a certain performance point level. So downforce is the one that can help you adjust by like 1/10 of a point if needed. So that's why it's at 65. Full control computer, 100%, no power restriction. Again, you don't need the transmission. I did it there because it's faster. And then we added racing muffler and the racing clutch as well. And that's it. That gets us to 649.08. Alright, here we go for 650. Bit more power on this tune, about 50 more horsepower than the previous one, so not a huge jump, but it is definitely noticeable on the straights. Gets you moving faster into turns and gets you going faster out of them. But stiffer overall on this, and I think that really helps the racing hard tires. Very small adjustments to the rear axle with camber actually make a huge difference on these tires, because you can change exactly how much grip is getting to them through that. And so I think I took some of the camber out so that way it had more contact overall, like not having to rely on turns so much to get optimal contact, but left it a little bit more camber angle up front, just so that the car could lean in like I'm doing here and still have a lot of grip while the weight of the car is on one side versus the other. And then the rear anti-roll bar is stiffened up just a little bit to keep the axle a little bit flatter in the back, again because the racing tires. A lot of this revolves around these tires because it makes a big difference. You can't really leave all the sport soft settings the same when you switch to hard tires. It makes a very big difference to tune it slightly. And having the roll bar stiffer there helped me to correct that oversteer. If the roll bar is too soft, it just makes it way too hectic to correct, and then you're flailing at your wheel to try and recover. So the acceleration on the front differential is a little bit lower, just so that we don't have any understeer occurring when we hammer the throttle out of turns, because I want to be able to get on power earlier. All those things together, and then yeah, lower ride height, slightly stiffer springs, makes it definitely a bit more racy. But you do got to be careful around the curves of the track. If you hit one really hard through a sharper turn, you are definitely going to bounce more. So things to keep in mind as these power levels go up. Last one here is 700. So this can kind of go two ways. You can do racing hard and tack on a bunch more power, or you can not go for a ton more power, because this thing can easily get over 600, and you can go for racing soft instead, which is what I did. Because again, I was going for handling here, but it just took a little bit of finesse with this to get it feeling right, because these tires do not forgive with this car. But once you get it right and you get a feel for it, it's quick. So anyway, racing soft tires, lowered ride height, as is, I think this is the same settings from 650. Stiffened up the rear anti-roll bar so that we can keep everything a little bit more level and in line on the back axle. Same settings for compression and expansion, springs as well. I took the negative camber basically all the way out of the back axle. You don't need it with the racing soft tires. I think they're grippy enough that you don't have to compensate very much with the turns in the back. Left it at 1 just so we could have some play with diving into turns and being able to handle a little more. And then toe, I'm not going to recommend toe one way or the other. That's kind of up to you. I found this has a nice balance, not too aggressive, but still noticeable. I think this definitely helps, having it close to 0.2 on the front, just with turning the car in. And then detune the differential even a little bit more. This car, you can actually go really low without it affecting the feel of it too much. So this isn't too low to where you're gonna have to worry about that, but it is low enough to where you can also get on the power pretty dang early still, despite us having almost 600 now. Despite that, let's see. High RPM turbo and the anti-lag. You don't need anti-lag if you don't want to. I was using it, just kind of fiddling around with it. But since we have the racing soft tires, we do still have to limit it a little bit. So 85% on the power restrictor. So yeah, biggest difference is tires, high RPM turbo, and a few tweaks with the suspension and diff. Now it rips. Now it really rips. Let's take a look. Alright, last and certainly not least, 700. This one is a fun one. This car was meant to be 700, I think. So overall, we got even a little bit more stiffer, just with these racing soft tires. These tires are very finicky on this car, but once you get everything dialed in, as you can see, it just rips. So I stiffened up the anti-roll bar in the rear. The edges of these tires you can actually rely on quite a bit more than even the racing hard tires, but because of that, you have to keep it all in check. You really want to minimize any sort of oversteer the back axle gets, really at any sort of speed. So that's the idea with the stiffness part. Slightly stiffer springs. I eliminated a lot of the rear camber on the rear axle, nearly all of it, just because there's enough of the soft tread to go around, even through turns at higher speed or turns at lower speed, to where you don't have to compensate with it. I think that was definitely noticeable. Left it more aggressive up front, of course, just so we have better cornering ability, but you'll notice that some of these things correspond to performance points when you adjust them. I think camber doesn't affect it too much. You want to rely more so on the actual effective grip, not what the number does. Slightly more toe up front. Like I said, you can rely on the edges of the tires more. I lowered the acceleration acceleration sensitivity of the rear diff for that reason. As you see there, kicked out a little bit. You don't have to, just my preference, because we have a lot more power now, obviously. But yeah, and then as well, going through those turns, I was gonna lower the body height a little more, but felt it would probably inhibit steering and such, so I left it. So there we have it. That's kind of my overview of tunes for this thing. I will do a video on its little brother, the R32. I know the R32 is a little more attainable. You don't necessarily have to be a certain amount of way through the game in order to get it without spending a bunch of money. So we'll definitely look at that. But this is definitely a car to have in your arsenal, no matter what kind of challenges you're doing. And again, you can tune it down below 600. I just didn't think that that would be the most beneficial for what I think most people are going to use it for. So that's why I went with the tunes that I did. But this is definitely one of those cars that the first drive does not do it justice. You definitely need to play around with it. So I encourage that. Hopefully these are good starting points for you, as are all my tunes. I never want to use a blanket statement that these are the best tunes. Everyone drives differently. Everyone has different equipment where the car is going to feel a little bit different. So play around with it. But until next time, hopefully you found some value in this. Hopefully you'll stick around for more tuning videos. I'm going to continue to make them. They're a lot of fun for me. I really like this technical, I guess, finagling of all these cars. And there's lots to do in this game with these, with various cars and tuning them. So if you're interested in that, consider liking, consider subscribing, because there will be many more. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed. We'll see you in the next one.